morning. I'm Daniele Mattioli, and my work is entitled I Drive: Assessing Environmental Causes of Driving Stress through Bayesian Networks. The field of autonomous car grew a lot in the last few years, both in the industrial and academic world. Car manufacturers and software companies are now developing and testing their own autonomous car. So user acceptance will be fundamental for a fast future usage of this new technology. Thus, we need to understand how these cars should be driving. The goals of my work are to assess the environmental causes of driving stress using both environmental and physiological data through Bayesian networks. Then we want to study whether different driving conditions, such as manual or autonomous, require different models of stress. And then we want to verify the behavior of physiological variables in stressful situations. So to model all these phenomena, we use Bayesian networks. Bayesian networks are a way to represent joint distributions. They are composed by nodes connected by links. Each node represents a random variable, while links between nodes represent the probabilistic relationship among them. So for instance, if we have a link going from node A to node B, then the probability distribution associated to node B is conditioned to node A, and we can interpret this probabilistic relationship as a causal effect relationship, saying that node A causes node B. So with Bayesian networks, we can express the joint distributions of all the variables in the network as the product of factors. We have one factor for each variable in the network, and each factor is conditioned to its parents. So for instance, here we see that the probability of A, B, and C is expressed as the product between the probability of C conditioned to its parents, so A and B, times the probability of B conditioned to its parent, that is A, times the probability of A. Exploiting this graphical representation, we can perform both probabilistic inference and parameter learning in our network. The identification of the environmental causes of driving stress is an inference problem. So to solve the inference problem, first we need to learn the parameters of our network that are the condition probability distributions of each node in the network. The structure of our network is the following one. So we have in the upper part the environmental variables. In the middle we have stress, and in the lower part of the network we have the physiological variables, because the idea is that the environment causes stress, and the stress itself causes changes in the physiological data. Stress is not measured during our acquisition, so it is a hidden variable in the network. Thus, the learning problem is unsupervised. To learn the parameters of the network, we use the expectation maximization algorithm, while for probabilistic inference, we use the junction tree algorithm. We build Bayesian networks with an incremental approach, meaning that for each possible combination of physiological nodes, we keep adding environmental nodes to see if results converge, and if it is possible for future acquisition to directly build the entire network. Our experimental vehicle is equipped with environmental sensors such as IMU, GPS, external cameras, and LiDAR to assess the environment surrounding the vehicle and the dynamics of the vehicle. And then we have also physiological sensors such as eye tracker or sensors for measuring the skin conductance, respiration, and the electrocardiogram. So usually in literature, stress is measured by using questionnaires or making participants press the lever of a handset control. However, we decided to directly use the physiological data because we know from literature that in stressful situations, our body reacts with physiological changes, such as increased heart rate, pupil dilatation, and general sweating. And all these changes are measurable by appropriate sensors. So for instance, from the electrocardiogram, we can retrieve the heartbeat rate and the heart rate variability. From the galvanic skin response that allows us to assess the sweating of our body, we can compute both the phasic and the tonic component of the skin conductance, but we can also compute the orienting responses that are sudden increases in the skin conductance. From the respiration, we can compute the respiration rate. So by using these physiological data, we can have an efficient assessment of the driving stress. When we work with Bayesian networks, we need discrete variables, so we performed discretization of our data. For discretization, we use the equal frequency approach, in which each class have the same number of samples, and we also use the k-means approach, in which the values in the same class have the same nearest center from a one-dimensional k-means cluster. Then, since we saw that results for the environmental variable were better with the equal frequency approach, while results for the physiological variable were better with the k-means, we also decided to use an hybrid approach between the two, and the results were better in the sense that we were able to find more environmental variables able to explain the data, so related to stress. All our environmental variables are discretized with 3 discrete classes, and also stress it has 3 discrete classes. Our data come from 2 different acquisitions. The first one was performed around Campus Leonardo. There was just 1 participant that drove manually, while the second one was performed around the Campus Bovisa. There were 6 participants that experienced 3 different driving conditions: autonomous, in which a computer drove the car; manual, in which the participant drove the car; and as a passenger, in which there was a person driving the car and the participant was the passenger. So we use all this data to train our model, so to learn the parameters of the Bayesian networks, and then once we learn the parameter, we can perform a probabilistic inference. For inference, we start by computing the condition probability of stress given each physiological variable, because stress is a hidden variable, so we need to associate the 3 discrete classes of stress to the 3 situations of relax, attention, and stress. So to provide this semantic to stress, we use literature results about physiological data behavior. So for instance, in this plot, we see the probability of stress given the energy of the orienting response. Energy is a binary variable, so if it is equal to 1, that means that there is no orienting response. We see that stress class 1 has the highest probability, while if energy is equal to 2, that means that there is an orienting response. Then we see that stress equal to 3 has the highest probability. We know from literature that if there is an orienting response, then the level of stress of a person increases. So by computing this condition probability for each physiological variable and exploiting literature results about physiological data, we can provide a semantic to stress. So for instance, here we see that stress equal to 1 means relax, stress equal to 2 means attention, and stress equal to 3 is stress. So if there is no orienting response, we are likely to be in relax, while if there is an orienting response, we are likely to be stressed. Then we compute the condition probability of each environmental variable given stress, in order to understand which environmental variables are more related to the 3 situations of relax, attention, and stress. So we, for each level of stress, we want to compute the probability of each environmental variable. So for instance, here we see the probability of the steering angle given stress, that allows us to understand which steering angle we should expect in the 3 situations. So we see that in relax, class 3 of steering angle, that represents a high steering angle, has the highest probability. So when we have maneuvers in which we completely turn left or right, we are likely to be in relax. This probability we see that decreases if we are in stress, while in stress it is class 2, that represents maneuvers with a medium steering angle, the class that has the highest probability. Then, since sometimes results were different from what we were expecting, we also decided to compute the joint condition probability of the environmental variables given stress, in order to better understand the environmental context characterizing the 3 situations of relax, attention, and stress. In particular, we computed the joint distribution of pairs of environmental variables. So for instance, here we see that in the marginal, the class 1 of speed, that means low speed, has the lowest probability if there is a stress. And this makes sense because it means that if the driver is stressed, then it is not likely that the vehicle has a low speed. However, when we consider the joint distributions between the speed and the steering angle, we see that the configuration with speed class equal to 1, that is low speed, and steering angle class equal to 2, that means medium steering angle, this configuration has the highest probability if there is a stress. So in this case, we are able to retrieve more information with respect to the marginal and to gain a better insight. So from this configuration, we understand that maneuvers in which we have a medium steering angle with low speed can cause stress, and this could represent, for instance, entering or exiting a turn. All the following results are confirmed by different discretization approaches. So we see that for acquisition 1, speed and time headway are the environmental variables that most explain the data. All these environmental variables have 3 discrete classes. So for speed, class 1 means low speed, class 2 medium speed, and class 3 high speed. So we see that low speed is associated to both relax and stress, while medium high speed are associated to attention. So in this case, it makes sense that low speed is associated to stress because in acquisition 1 there were obstacles around the vehicle, such as pedestrians, vehicles, there were traffic lights. So it makes sense that also for low speed the driver was stressed. The time headway instead measures the time difference between the nearest identified object. In particular, we consider the time headway from the nearest front car. So class 1 means low distance from the nearest front car, class 2 means medium distance, and class 3 means high distance. So we see that as the level of stress increases, the distance from the nearest front car decreases. For acquisition 2, instead, the vertical angular velocity, the longitudinal linear acceleration, speed, and the steering angle are the variables that most explain the data. From the vertical angular velocity, we have that class 2, that represents a medium vertical angular velocity, so it represents entering a turn, can cause stress. While class 3, that represents being in the turn, so a high vertical angular velocity, does not cause stress. For the longitudinal linear acceleration, we have that class 1 means acceleration, class 2 means acceleration almost equal to 0, and class 3 means deceleration. So we see that in the autonomous and manual driving condition, deceleration can cause stress, while for the passenger driving condition, it is class 1, so acceleration that can cause stress. For speed, again, speed class 1 means low speed, class 2 medium, and class 3 high speed. So we see that high speed can cause more stress than low speed, so class 1. And finally, for the steering angle, we have that class 1 represents a low steering angle, class 2 a medium steering angle, and class 3 a high steering angle. So we see that maneuvers with a high steering angle do not cause stress. So maneuvers in which we completely turn left or right do not cause stress, while maneuvers in which the steering angle is low-medium can cause a state of attention or stress. For acquisition 2, we also build a complete dataset using all the data of all the participants in the free driving conditions. And in this case, we see that speed is the only environmental variable able to explain the data. It means that the free driving conditions are different, and each driving condition requires its own model of stress. And these results are also confirmed by post-driving questionnaires that participants filled in which we see in orange that the degree of stress is different in the free driving condition, and as one could expect, in the autonomous driving condition, it is higher than in the manual and the passenger driving condition. So our results show that speed, time headway, longitudinal linear acceleration, vertical angular velocity, steering angle, depending on the level of stress of the driver, can show values with a higher probability. Then we see that different driving conditions require different models of stress. And finally, we confirm literature results about the behavior of physiological data in stressful situations. For future works, we could perform a new acquisition in different environments, such as highways or environments in which there are obstacles around the vehicle, to train the Bayesian network with more data to better understand, for instance, the behavior of the respiration rate that was acquired only in acquisition 2 and was the only physiological variables for which results in the passenger and manual driving conditions were not always perfectly in line with literature results. Then we could use our results in an autonomous car to make it drive in a less stressful way. We could obtain a continuous ground truth of stress during the driving session. And finally, we could use dynamic Bayesian networks to perform online analysis, so to detect on the air stressful situations. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to Professor Matteucci for allowing me to work to this thesis, and to Alessandro Gabrielli for guiding me throughout this thesis. Mm-hmm. Scusi, è dovuto al fatto? Sì. Sì, allora si possono utilizzare anche variabili continue, però per fare il tipo di inferenza statistica che dovevamo fare noi, bisognava per forza, non c'erano algoritmi esatti per fare il lavoro, diciamo, con variabili continue. Quindi abbiamo dovuto discretizzare, che è anche quello che fanno in letteratura nella maggior parte dei lavori sulle reti bayesiane. No, no, sono stati acquisiti durante l'acquisizione, c'erano dei sensori sulla persona, quindi mentre avevamo sia le variabili ambientali, ma anche le corrispettive variabili fisiologiche No, 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 cioè, no, no, no. Sì. Ok, grazie mille.